Okay, hello everyone. Today we're talking about the Puritan challenges to the religious settlement, and we're going to be looking at how Puritans challenged Elizabeth's religious settlement of 1559, particularly in Parliament. Your starter today is to explain how Elizabeth faced oppositions from the following three groups. Those groups we're looking at is Group A, the recusants. We must remember that these are people who refuse to go to church, and you'll want to think about which religions did not want to go into the new Church of England. Focus specifically on the Catholics. How did they oppose Elizabeth? Think of the various plots as well as any foreign wars. And lastly, Philip of Spain. How did he oppose Elizabeth? So do go ahead and take a few moments to write your title, learning objective, and starter. Complete the three groups you see below. When you're finished, you can resume playing and we'll take them up together. So you've had an opportunity to now look at recusants, Catholics, and Philip and how they themselves would have opposed Elizabeth. Well, we can see that the recusants, by not going to church, they showed the Queen that they refused to follow her rules. And in medieval England, in the Elizabethan era, it was very important the monarch had control over the population. England had to have one religion because religion was the most important thing in people's lives. Recusancy was a form of passive resistance, but it was still a problem for the Queen. As for the Catholics, we know about the rebellion of the Northern Earls, the Ridolfi plot, Throckmorton plot, and Babington plot. All of these were plans to kill Elizabeth. Catholics opposed Elizabeth as she was a Protestant, and sometimes they decided to do this violently. We can see that in the four examples listed previously. And lastly, Philip. Well, after his marriage was rejected, he took it upon himself to, and we'll use quotes here, to save England from the heretic Queen Elizabeth. So he used the Spanish Armada, and this was a significant point of opposition, only to be saved really by a bit of luck, the wind and the weather. So do make sure you have those three reasons Elizabeth faced opposition from each of the groups, and when you do, you can go ahead and resume playing. So just to recap some of the context, we're looking at some Puritan beliefs here, and your job is to write down the correct beliefs of the Puritans. No reason to write down anything that is incorrect. So have a quick look, you can pause the video, have a quick look at these different statements and start to think which ones are true and which ones aren't. Once you're finished, you can go ahead and play the video. We'll take up the ones that are correct, and those will be the ones you'll need to record in your note. So let's have a look. We have Puritans believe that the rituals, ceremonies, and teachings developed over centuries by the Catholic Church went against God's original intentions for his people. Well, any Puritan we know would not like Catholicism and therefore would certainly agree that these teachings went against God's original intentions. Congregations could organize themselves and a church hierarchy was not needed, so that was having a pope in charge. Especially bishops, you could just run the church on your own, and we know that Puritans agreed with this. They could be run by local committee. Some believed that things such as dancing, theaters, and enjoyment were sinful. We know that many Puritans were miserable. They did not like to be entertained. Their lives were to consist of religion and work. People should dress modestly. They loved that, especially if the clothing was black or white. Sunday was the Lord's day and should be devoted entirely to religious study. Absolutely. And unlike Catholics, Puritans accepted the new church. This was not true. We know that the Puritans did not accept Elizabeth's new Church of England. They, in fact, wanted to improve it by getting rid of every single facet of the Catholic faith that was inside. So you'll need to be writing down the top 5 points. We'll leave the bottom one off because, of course, it's incorrect. So pause the video again, write down those 5 points into your note. These are the Puritan beliefs, and when you're finished, resume playing. So a little bit more to do with context. We're going to complete each statement and then answer the question. So we'll do the first one together, and then you'll be able to crack on with the remaining three. So the blank settlement of blank was when? So we would want to fill that in to say the religious settlement of 1559 was when, and this is where we need to develop an answer to explain what the religious settlement was. We would say something like this gave the rules for the new church, the Act of Supremacy and Act of Uniformity. Elizabeth becomes Supreme Governor. We know the Act of Uniformity also set out recusancy fines. So the next 2 points, you need to fill in the blanks and answer. The last one is you just answering on your own. So do go ahead and pause the video, have a go at writing those down and answering them. We'll take them up when you're ready. So let's have a look. The purpose of giving a recusant a fine of 12p was to. Well, we know the purpose of this was to encourage people to attend a new church. 12p was a substantial amount of money in those days. Most people were very poor. They could not afford that fine, so they just went to church instead. And we have a note here that church equals control over the population. If people go to church, you can share specific messages with them, and they will follow your rules. What did the Catholics think about the religious settlement of 1559? You see what we did there? We just mixed them around a little bit. Well, they weren't very pleased. We know that Elizabeth was having a really hard time enforcing her rules, and this is when she began the visitations. And we know that some Catholics decided to rebel quite violently. We can see that in the rebellion of the Northern Earls, the Ridolfi plot, the Throckmorton plot, Abington plot. We know that Catholics did not agree with the settlement. They wanted to maintain their own independent Catholic Church. And our last question, why did Elizabeth need everyone to follow her rules? Well, to answer this, we need to remember what the most important thing in England was, and it was religion, and religion meant control. She needed to keep control over her religion and stop England from descending into a civil war. It was a very high possibility that the Catholics and Protestants would actually rise up against each other and have a proper civil war or conflict. So Elizabeth had to establish that her rules were the law and people had to follow this. It was very important that everyone followed her rules to the letter. So do make sure that you have this in your note correct. If you don't, take a moment now by pausing the video. Otherwise, resume playing and we'll be moving forward. Now, your job is to find the reading about Puritan challenges to the religious settlement, and you're going to have to read through this for understanding and memory, as we're going to be using the knowledge we acquire in a task shortly after. Now, if you're watching this online on YouTube, you probably don't have a textbook handy, so the next two slides will contain snapshots of the reading that we need to do. Just simply pause the video there, and you'll be able to skim through and read as needed. So here we have our first reading. We'll really want to focus on the vestments controversy of 1566 and the proposals by Thomas Cartwright in 1570. So we'll want to get a good idea of Matthew Parker. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, and he really believed in the wearing of these vestments. And these were the fancy things that priests would actually wear at the time. It was almost like a purplish and gold robe. Now, many Puritan priests actually refused to wear these vestments, and there was a significant controversy over wearing these vestments, and as a result, some priests were actually punished. So we have Thomas Sampson here. He was the Dean of Christ Church in Oxford, so not too far from where we are in High Wycombe. He was dismissed from his position. In other words, he was fired because he refused to wear a robe. In London, 37 Puritan priests, they were dismissed. Another word is fired from their jobs because they refused to wear those colored robes. The proposals by Thomas Cartwright, we need to know that he was a professor of divinity. So professor of divinity essentially means he is a RS professor. And he was calling for the introduction of a Presbyterian system of church government. We remember the Presbyterians, they were a form of Puritan who believed the church should be run by a committee. So he said, ready? Let's get rid of the archbishop. Let's get rid of all the bishops. Let's get rid of everyone in the church hierarchy system. Let's make sure that each church should be ruled locally by its own ministers and elders from the community, and that ministers should be elected by their own church. These were ideas that were incredibly revolutionary and ideas that Elizabeth did not like. So the Presbyterian system he wanted to see introduced would have actually weakened the power of the Queen, and it would take away from her power as supreme governor. So we could imagine, as a result, she rejected his ideas by both her and the Privy Council. His views actually cost him his job. He was forced to leave England and go over to Geneva, which was a much more friendly area to both Protestants and Puritans. So make sure we've skimmed through that. I would highly advise writing down some of the points that I highlighted along with it. We're going to need that information a little bit later on. So much the same, let's have a look here. We need to look at the French marriage pamphlet of John Stubbs, something that you might have already covered in the past in a little case study. So we know in 1579, Mr. John Stubbs, he was quite angry about the marriage negotiations by a French Roman Catholic with Elizabeth, said some pretty nasty things, and had his right hand chopped off in the process for seditious writing. Today we would call that slander, but it was called seditious writing then. And he had his right hand swiftly removed from his body, and he was chucked in prison for 18 months. The Marplet tracts of 1588 and 89. Now, these were a bit harder to prosecute because they were anonymous. They didn't actually know who wrote the Marplet tracts, but they attacked the church and the bishops, and their content offended many, many people. The authors were never identified, and their publication was lost among Puritan support, as respect for the texts and pamphlets contained violent and very sarcastic, offensive language, things that Puritans would not like. So even the Puritans viewed the Marplet tracts as being a little bit too extreme. So to counter this criticism, some Protestants wrote pamphlets against Puritan views. So now we've got a little war going on between the two factions that can actually agree on the language of the Bible. In 1593, Richard Hooker, he published his Laws of Ecclesiastical Policy. That means policies of the church, as a defense of the Anglican Church. And in the same year, Richard Bancroft launched a little bit of a bitter attack against Puritanism through his pamphlet called The Survey of the Pretended Holy Discipline, Dangerous Positions, and Proceedings. Effectively, we've got a little bit of a turf war between our Protestants and our Puritans, people who traditionally used to work together. So your task, your job is to take a plain piece of paper or a lined piece of paper, or you can do this in your exercise book by drawing 4 quadrants, as you see on the right-hand side here. Let's just go ahead and circle that so we know what we're referring to. You can go ahead and draw this or fold it. The choice is yours, but in each box you are going to write the following headings: divestment controversy, proposals by Thomas Cartwright, the marriage pamphlet of John Stubbs, and the Marplet tracts of 1588 and 89. Those individual titles will fill each box here, 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 and here. Your job is to use the reading, so you might want to rewind the video and just pause it on those slides if you didn't take any notes. And you'll want to summarize in detail what each of these contain. So what was the Vestments controversy? What did Thomas Cartwright propose? The French marriage pamphlet of John Stubbs. We know a lot about him already, and the Marplet tract. So you can use pictures, words, timelines, mind maps. I beg you, be creative. And as and when you finish this, please do a little bit of review work through your flashcards or your summary books.